A couple of weeks ago in Toronto, there was some devastating flooding. I'm sure people saw the videos online. But I also noticed that one of the places worst hit were the CBC headquarters in Toronto. And it got me thinking about the cost of them renovating that and just the cost, period, of the CBC. They have headquarters in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, right across the country. They actually own hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate, not to mention their equipment. We're talking high-level production equipment. This is worth a lot of money. Independent, smaller broadcasters would never be able to afford that, but because it's all taxpayer funded, they can get the best. $1.3 billion a year, and that's not even when Trudeau has given them a little extra money on top. Is it worth this? Are we getting value for that money? And I would argue we're not, but it's time for a real review of the broadcaster, how our money is spent, and the value we're getting for it. I want to go back to the origins of the CBC.
Let's begin!
Back in the 1950s when it was created, it made a lot of sense back then. We were used to radio broadcasts. We still have CBC Radio and Radio-Canada. That was a time when we were looking for ways to unify a large country, to get messages out when production costs were really significant. So it was an investment, really, in Canadian unity that made sense back then. But that's not the case today. It's increasingly become a tool of government, this government in particular, to send its messaging out to the people. The analysis is poor. For example, in the recent October 7th massacre by Hamas in Israel, there was a memo that went out from CBC executives to their journalists saying they should not call Hamas a terrorist organization. Hamas has been a declared terrorist organization in Canada for over 20 years. So now we're talking about misinformation, disinformation coming from our public broadcaster, particularly in an environment when we seem to be getting less and less service. They're cutting employees in the hundreds. They're cutting back their production costs because they say they're on track to lose $125 million this past year. And yet, they've set aside $1.5 million in bonuses to give to their 1,200 top executives. This makes no sense.
On the 4th, you announced that 800 jobs would be cut from the CBC. At that time, you were asked whether or not executives would be given bonuses. You said you weren't ruling it out. Are you going to be awarded a bonus for 2023?
We have a process which is very rigorous. After internal deliberations with the Board of Directors at our June board meeting, once we've had a chance to present the audited financial statements, there will be a discussion, and we will inform employees at that time of the decision that is taken.
Because you are a member of that board.
I am.
So you not only have a say with regard to bonuses for the top executives, yourself included, you have a say not only in March when you're a member of the management team, the most senior member of the management team, but then you get a second say at the board level. So with all due respect, you do have a fair bit of power in terms of bonuses. So I'll ask again, will you be up for a bonus in the consideration at the board meeting in June?
As I've said previously, this is part of an internal deliberation. It's an HR function, and we have to be respectful of the governance that rules the CBC Radio-Canada.
But you do know the answer.
We're not talking about the heydays of the CBC when we had programs like, hey, Hockey Night in Canada that everybody watched.
Talking to America.
You know, programs like that, they're all gone now.
Handful of loose cash that was just lying around. Fire!
So of course people aren't watching. When I say viewership is down, I mean really down, significantly. There are whole areas of the country that virtually don't watch it at all, and the ones that do, there's less and less numbers all the time. This in a time when you have a whole production kit in your pocket, basically. We didn't used to have this kind of stuff available. You can create Today, you've got the lighting, you've got the mobile cameras, you've got your own phones. You can do this today, and you can do it with agility, and you can do it in a timely way. And they haven't adapted at all, it seems, to this. We no longer need a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation when every Canadian can be a broadcaster. The current state of the CBC comes on top of almost 2 decades of the CBC itself identifying the coming digital age. In annual report after annual report, CBC talked about how this was a coming phenomenon, an emerging phenomenon that they had to be in front of. And they did nothing to adapt. So the content needs to be crisp, it needs to be on point, it needs to be timely, it needs to be interesting, and the CBC is not. These huge, expensive, well-equipped headquarters in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Ottawa, what purpose do they serve? Are they really telling you the Canadian story? And I would argue they are not. I have been in those studios, computer after computer after computer, employee after employee, literally as far as the eye can see. What are they actually producing? It's not content that obviously the Canadian public are very interested in, or the numbers would show differently. I've been to many rallies that our leader, Pierre Poilievre, has done, often introducing him, particularly in BC. He gets the biggest applause at those rallies when he talks about defunding the CBC.
You know, it just warms my heart to think of the beautiful family rolling up in their U-Haul to their wonderful new home in the former headquarters of the CBC.
And they love it for a reason, because it speaks truth. We know that the CBC has become virtually irrelevant, and it has made itself so by not being agile, adaptable, and frankly, costing way too much for what we get. It's time to defund the CBC and give the taxpayers a refund.